joy, discovery, and harmony.
Hi, everyone. It's Heather. Just a quick note before we get started. When I first interviewed this week's guest, Z were going by their original birth name. Since we did all of the production for the episode, their name is now Stef. So although you're going to hear their birth name, Steve, mentioned throughout the episode, all of the visual assets will mention Stef. And if you decide to be in contact in the future, please reach out specifically to Stef. The other thing I want to let you all know is that the Brave Files, aka me, host Heather Vickery, are taking a little break for the summer. This is our last and final episode of Pride Month. We hope you've loved them as much as we loved doing these interviews, producing them, and sharing all of the incredible stories from these fantastic guests. Love that queer joy. I am now going to take the months of July and August off to regroup, rejuvenate, rest, connect, build some new cool things, and we will be back in September. But don't worry, we are still going to be sharing episodes with you. We are going to replay some of our most loved and treasured episodes from the last 4.5 years. Gosh, we have almost 230 episodes to pull from. And so we are so excited to reshare some of those with maybe some of our newer listeners. So don't go anywhere. You're still going to get a download every single week, and we'll be back with brand new content in September. Have a great summer, everybody. We are closing out Pride Month with the last of 5 queer voices. Again, we share queer voices all the time on the Brave Files podcast, but we really wanted to celebrate and lift up some really wonderful, impactful, incredible, unique voices from all across the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And today is really all about having a beautiful conversation about acceptance and creating our own abundance. After battling some pretty intense mental health issues, Stef Garvin left a job that other people considered a dream job and began life again. Today, Steve helps others rewrite and share their own stories in the most beautiful of ways. I do want to mention that it wasn't until after I began the interview that I realized Steve's pronouns were ze, them. We talk about Steve's pronouns in the interview because in the intro, you'll hear that I use he, him pronouns. And I'm not perfect. I make mistakes just like everybody else. I should have clarified that up front, and I did not do that. So that's on me. I try to keep my mistakes out in the open as an opportunity to show you all that you can make mistakes. And when we know better, we do better. And sometimes even when we know better, we screw up. And we can just try our best again, when the opportunity presents itself. So we talk about Steve's pronouns in the interview. And I'm super grateful to Steve for being open, honest, and transparent about embracing pronouns that most resonate with Steve's soul. Because it's a fairly rare thing to see someone in their 40s, 50s, or even older change their pronouns, I really appreciate Steve being willing to inspire others and show them that it can be done. This is also a great time to remind all of you that pronouns have nothing to do with behavior. They are about feelings, specifically the way you feel about yourself. You have every right to behave however you see fit, no matter what pronouns you use. Boys can wear dresses and love them, and nail polish and high heels, and they can be emotional, and girls can use tools and burp. Behavior should not be gendered. So just remember that and keep that in mind as we move into this conversation. All right, y'all, this is a deep conversation, but it's a truly impactful one. So let's get started. We are so excited to be partnering with the Brown Cow Ice Cream Parlor to raise awareness and funds for Brave Space Alliance throughout this entire Pride Month. Brave Space Alliance is an organization that I personally hold very dear. They provide education and access-based programming for BIPOC, trans, and gender nonconforming individuals. Throughout the month of June, the Brown Cow is showing their pride with some really fun specials, including their famous 7-layer rainbow cake, rainbow frosted sugar cookies. These are my favorite cookies in the entire world. And they even have a unique Pride ice cream flavor that was conceived of and developed by their LGBTQ creamery manager. When you buy any of these Pride items, either in person or online, the Brown Cow will donate 20% of the sales to Brave Space, and it gets better. If you mention the Brave Files podcast when you order, I will personally match that donation, and the Brown Cow will match my match. That means that by ordering delicious Pride treats and mentioning the Brave Files podcast, 60% of your order will go directly towards Brave Space Alliance. You'll find the Brown Cow in charming downtown Forest Park, Illinois, or you can order from them directly online at browncowicecream.com. Thank you for helping us celebrate Pride Month and make a difference in the LGBTQ community. You're listening to The Brave Files, where we share stories from people who've stepped out of fear and into bravery in every possible way. What we know for sure is that when we choose bravely on purpose, we choose bigger, we win bigger, and it's contagious. It's our hope that these stories connect with you and encourage you to embrace bravery in every possible way, day after day. Together, we can build a movement that enriches both our lives and our communities. The Brave Files is brought to you by Vickery & Co., a success and leadership coaching firm dedicated to helping you build a life and a business that you are absolutely in love with. Vickery & Co. offers group programs, membership communities, one-on-one coaching, VIP days, corporate trainings, workshops, keynote speaking, and so much more. Visit vickeryandco.com to get all the details. Hi, friends. I am so excited to have my friend Stef Garvin here with us today. And I love this bio. Stef Garvin's fellow MBA colleagues thought that he had won the career lottery. What they didn't know was that he cried Sunday afternoons, dreading going to work the next day. Y'all, here is your sign. Change some shit. Stef felt like he was stuck inside someone else's story until he discovered that he could actually rewrite the script. Years after, on a journey to recreate his story, he now loves Monday mornings, which I still don't love all Monday mornings, so we can talk about that, and helping authors and speakers cross the financial wilderness using their valued voices, because it is a bit of a shit show out there, folks. Most recently, Stef has been rewriting the rewrite of his own script to include stepping away from the church that he has attended most of his life because he could no longer put on a smile at church while living out of harmony with his internal values. And it is like one surprise after another, folks. And I am excited to have this conversation. Please help me welcome Stef to the show. Hi, friend.
Hi, Heather. It's great to see you. We even wore the same colors.
We did. We're both in purple. I was like, oh, you got the purple memo. Yay. I know you all can't see us, but we can see each other. So, wah, wah. Sorry. Stef, you and I, but I feel like this is less and less true now. Maybe it's all becoming more clear. I feel like we've been friends for a few years now, and we are a bit of an unusual pair. At least I had thought that perhaps we were an unusual pair, but we found so many reasons to deeply connect with one another's work and our valued missions in life and all of that. But you just keep surprising me. And I do want to talk about your before life, like the I Hate Mondays life. And maybe we should start there, and then we can get into some of the surprises. So tell us about that before life.
The before life. Well, there's actually a before life as well, of course, but let's start with the before life right now. Instead of what I now recognize as following my heart, I followed my head, and I've always been good with numbers. Numbers come easily for me, and it's pretty well respected in the business world when you can manipulate numbers and technology and all that kind of thing. And so I found my way, kind of navigated my way into corporate accounting, where I get to use all the numbers and the technology and figure out how to make the money work and all that kind of thing. And it worked. except that it didn't.
Mm.
So from the outside, it looked like, I had this enviable career in a Fortune 500 company, yada, yada, yada. Inwardly, I felt like my soul had been scraped clean, and
Oh, wow.
there was not much left of me.
Why do you think that was?
At the time, I had no idea, which was part of the problem. Now that I've done lots of journaling and introspection and, using my voice and so forth, I now recognize that I was not living in harmony with who I am. I wasn't being true to my own voice. I wasn't being true to my own passions. I wasn't being true in the way I express myself. And you can use all kinds of different ways of interpreting that. And most of them are probably true. And it was just really a matter of, well, how do I express myself in a way that's authentic? How do I express myself in a way that is true? So when I left corporate finance, and it brought me to the point where first of all, I ended up getting whooping cough and coughing so hard I'd pass out, literally. And going back to work and getting no appreciation and no compassion at all for what I'd just been through. And in fact, actually getting this nasty write-up with the HR director and my boss.
Of course.
And just like, what do I have to do? And it brought me to one of the lowest points of my life, such that the next morning I was planning on ending all the pain.
Oh, wow.
And 5 minutes before I headed out to the pharmacy to engage in my exit strategy and trigger warnings, I went into the restroom. And I still find it kind of ironic that, here I am going off to end it all, and I need to make a pit stop. So I make a pit stop, and while I'm in the restroom, I not hear this voice that says, don't use a permanent solution to solve a temporary problem.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay. And that was enough for me to push pause on my plans and then kind of live into that space of, well, what does that actually mean? If this is temporary, how the hell do I get onto the other side of feeling like crap? And began a multi-year journey of exploring that. But one of the first things that I did was started to let my creative expression come out, which had been suppressed forever because I never felt like I was good enough. That, I can't compete, can't compare to those people who I do know and appreciate and what they can do.
So that's like a lot to unpack, right? You were in finance, but you can be in finance and be creative. Why do you feel like you can? In fact, my co-host for my other podcast, Alan Seals, is totally a numbers nerd, finance, like brilliant, all of that. But
it's just funny because I sometimes have introduced myself as being a creative accountant, and people immediately go to Enron and WorldCom and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, please. So what happened in your before life that told you that you shouldn't be creative?
Basically, I was in competition with my dad.
Was he creative?
He was very creative, and from my young eyes, everything he touched turned to gold, and it's like everything from when we made the cake for the father and son competition in Cub Scouts, Dad just like went all out, and it was like amazing. From that to, looking at some of the drawings that he did when he was taking art lessons and so forth. And, little things like, I spend all day cleaning the garage, and I'm excited to show Dad, and Dad comes in and he's like, well, it's really nice, but what about that and that and that and that? I'm like, freak, what do I have to do?
As a parent, that is something we have to remind ourselves to praise before we bring up other stuff. So did he tell you consistently that your work wasn't up to par?
One, I don't think he did intentionally. And two, I don't think he did consciously.
Okay.
I think, and part of it was, and from this side, looking back, what I see is that Dad actually really struggled with issues of perfectionism himself. He never felt like he measured up.
Of course.
And because he never measured up, he never saw that anybody else ever measured up. And so
that's right.
So he didn't specifically, I mean, in fact, he was a really nice guy, but he was also very isolated, especially during that time, because he was in a similar journey that I was in. He was just trying to survive and was not letting himself express in a couple of different ways. He didn't let his art, he wasn't an artist at the time, a practicing artist. And he also, one of the things that I came to learn later on was that he was gay.
Damn. That's like the third surprise. Wow. I have no idea. Okay. All right. Steve is like my surprise bucket friend. When did you find out that your father was closeted? Did he know?
Oh,
Was he out?
well, he eventually came out, but he was honestly in his late 50s when he came out. And my parents ended up getting a divorce. Dad moved. We were living in the Seattle area at the time. Dad moved to New York City and started exploring the art museums and his sexuality and all that.
I love how those two are together. The art museums and his sexuality, totally on par with one.
Well, for me, it was really about allowing himself to express, to be who he is.
Yeah.
And for him, the two were very much connected.
Yeah.
How do you express who you are? How do you let yourself really be seen rather than being closeted? And there are so many ways to be closeted.
When you hide yourself, you miss out on so many opportunities.
Well, not only do we miss out on so many opportunities, but everybody else that could benefit from our closetedness, we miss out on so many opportunities.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that I really, really wish now that my own children are coming out, that I could have had conversations with him while he was still alive and said, help me understand what's going on here, because this is all new to me and I don't have any clue what's happening. And, how do we navigate this space?
So you never got to have a real heart-to-heart conversation with him after he moved to New York?
Not about that. No.
Why not?
He
because he wasn't willing to talk about it, or because you were too afraid to ask?
More the former than the latter. He was a very private person. And I don't know if it was just kind of the culture that he came from and the generation that he came from, but everything was suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about mental health issues. We don't talk about sexuality. We don't talk about gender. We don't talk about, lots of things. You just kind of put your nose to the grindstone and get to work. Is that really what you want to be doing? Is that really how you want to show up and be with people? And for him, there was a lot of him that was hidden. And it began, when he came out, my parents got divorced and, by the way, got remarried a few years later.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of like opened the door, surprise, and then shut the door. But there was always that tension between my parents and their relationship, because there were things that were discussed loudly and with lots of energy, and other things that were never discussed that was kind of like the elephant in the room that was about to stampede, and we didn't know how to deal with it. And so it was a matter of figuring out, how do I, now that I'm not in that same environment, how do I create a life that is more true for me, and not only true for me, but also true for my children and my family.
Yeah. Were you raised Mormon?
Oh yeah, yes. Both my parents were what's known as converts. They were not raised Mormon, but they both joined the church about the same time, in their early 20s.
Which probably has something to do with why your dad would come out and then remarry your mom.
Oh, very much. Yeah, it has a lot to do with it.
And so that lesson, while maybe not specifically stated, was don't be yourself, don't be happy, don't challenge the status quo, just put your head down and do what you're told.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah,
which is the same path that I was following, when I was doing the corporate accounting type of stuff.
Right. So how old were you when you had that moment in the bathroom where you heard a voice say, don't use a permanent solution to solve a temporary problem?
I was 45.
And so you had children?
Yes, I did have children. Had all 4 of my children and my wife.
All 4 of your children. Yeah. All right. So you've been very open. Anyone who follows you already, and I know about your mental health struggle, about your children's mental health struggles. Can you take us? So you hear this voice, you have this moment, and you go back and go, okay, wait a minute. If this is just temporary, what the fuck do I do? And I know Steve never uses that word, and I use it all the time. And also, I think he kind of likes it. He just won't admit it.
No, well, let me correct that. So I do use it, and I actually used it quite a bit this weekend because because I use it when I am really, really freaking pissed off, and I'm not really. So it's reserved for special occasions.
I think it's just the most versatile word in the world. No, seriously. So take us to that moment. What were your solutions? How did you start to unravel this and piece it back together and navigate it as not just a human, but as a parent and as a partner?
Well, the first thing that I started to do, I think, was just really start to allow myself to express. And so when some of the first few steps that I took was I started with this book, The Artist Within,
Okay.
by Whitney Freya, and became a creatively fit coach. So learning how to, use art to express and kind of navigate, and developed quite a few creative practices that I still use today. But also, it was just really kind of and she uses really simple techniques, paint a rectangle, do this, none of it's like Rembrandt or anything. But it was enough for me to just kind of, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can try some things. And so I started doing some of that. The other thing that I developed around that same time was, while I'd been working with balance sheets and income statements and all that kind of stuff, and as an accountant, I realized that there was no emotional balance sheet in that work, and that I needed to figure out, well, okay, my finances are in a decent shape right now. How do I actually rebalance my emotional balance sheet? And so I started looking at, okay, well, what are the assets that I have? What are the liabilities that I have? Part of that was also asking the question, what are the things that zap my energy, drain my energy? And what are the things that boost my energy?
Yeah.
And I want to reduce the things that drain my energy, and I want to increase the things that boost my energy. And just by paying attention to that, navigating that space, and like, okay, well, how do I do that? And so it was allowing myself to create, to play, to not have the right answers, to be willing to make mistakes, and to get it wrong. And because I allowed myself to do things that I had been really reluctant to do before, make mistakes being paramount among those, I began to find answers that I had not been seeing before.
That's really like a deep thought, because you were willing to not have the right answers, to make mistakes, to try things. You were able to see things that you couldn't see before.
Right. Because I think too often we think, well, here's my script, which is why I refer to that, is that, here's my script. This is the part I need to play. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a Mormon, I'm a good person, I'm an accountant, I'm whatever. And because of all those kind of labels that we place upon ourselves, the roles that we take on, they kind of dictate, well, because I am this, then I am that. That because of this, I need to do that. I need to follow this routine. Until we realize, well, maybe it's actually not working out so well that way.
Maybe it's not.
Maybe the end result that we're getting, if it's not the end result that we want, then maybe it's time to change the script, time to change the way that the story is going, so that we can create a better ending, a happier ending.
Yeah. If you're not getting the result you want, change the story. Yeah.
Because our stories are like the reel that is playing in our minds, like, constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that story isn't producing positive results, if the ending that we're creating, and we're not just creating it, when we're on our deathbed, but we're created, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, if we get to those check-in points and it's like, wow, I'm not heading in the direction that I want to be heading, then how do I change the story so that I do get to where it is that I want to get?
Well, so what I love about you is that you really practice what you preach. I mean, that's the core of the kind of coaching work you do, and how you support people in rewriting their stories and putting their voices out there. First of all, I did not know that you were Mormon, which doesn't matter, folks. I want to be clear and say that, except that I know a lot of the Exmos and I've interviewed several, here on the podcast. I've never interviewed an ex-Mormon man before, although I learned just within the last hour that I should not assume gender. Once again, I feel like this is a lesson I learned a lot, and my 12-year-old is far more superior at remembering that than I am. But you've applied this same tactic to your life repeatedly, and most recently in leaving the church, and I'm hoping you'll share a little bit of that story with us.
Sure. What do you want to know?
Well, I don't know if you loved it. I have a client who still really values being Mormon. It's amazing to me that I think she listens to the show. So hi, you know who you are. It amazes me that she loves me, that that we are in each other's lives, because it's counter to most of the teachings in the community. So at what point did you notice something wasn't fitting for you, wasn't right for you? And then how long did it take you to make a change? And what really pushed you over the edge there? I'm guessing a long ass time.
Yeah. And there are many, many answers to that question. And also regarding the person that you referred to just a moment ago, I still really value some things about the Mormon faith.
Sure.
It's just, again, going back to that, one of those key words that you asked me about initially is, how do we live in harmony?
Yeah.
How do we live in joy? And how do we open ourselves to discovery? And I found myself just kind of being in conflict with my values. And at the same time, one of the reasons that joy is such a paramount word for me is because one of the scriptures that really served as a guiding light for me through my really dark times of my life was this idea that men are that they might have joy. Of course, it was written in the patriarch way, but we people, humans, are meant to have joy. It's not just like available to the few and the select and the chosen ones, but that all of us should have access.
All people deserve joy.
And so how do we actually get to that place of joy? How do we find what that is? And so one of the things that, again, going back to that emotional balance sheet that I referred to, is the question that I was really asking was, does this bring me joy, or does this rob my joy? And honestly, my relationship with the LDS church has always been a little bit fraught with tension. One, because I have always been, and even seems to be increasingly so, of a pretty liberal bent. And that is not the nature of the LDS church.
Yeah. Yes. And while I know there are some folks in the LDS church who are supportive of LGBTQ rights, the church itself is not.
Yeah, not at all.
In any way, shape, or form. I heard you say your children have been coming out, and you have recently come out in some ways, which absolutely gobstopped me. Would you be willing to share?
Sure. Well, honestly, I feel like I've been coming out in lots of ways, lots of different ways. But yeah, my daughter, my second child, came to us, I don't know, sometime in the last 4 or 5 years, and said, I'm bisexual. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know that. And I was kind of reconciling, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And and for a long time, she went through her own journey of like, do I belong in church? Do I not belong in church? And does this fit for me? And she eventually came to the conclusion that no, it does not at all. But the thing that really hurt me was the fact that she came out to us as her parents 7 years after she came out to friends at school.
Why do we think that was?
Well, because she didn't feel safe to be able to talk about it. It did not feel like an open environment in which we could discuss things like that.
Yeah. And so when you say that really hurt you, your child didn't hurt you. The fact that that was the situation that your child was in is what hurt you, and that you had a role to play in that.
Absolutely.
Because when we don't say anything, we're saying something. When we don't speak for what we believe in, we're speaking against it, right? Because if we don't have a model to match things up against, or if we don't know we're safe when it comes to sexuality and gender, You can't just assume you're safe.
Right.
You have to know you're safe.
Yes. And so Jessica coming out and expressing who she was, one, sent reverberations with regards to my dad and just what that relationship was like. And by the way, about just a couple of months after I left corporate, my dad passed away. So it had been a few years since that had happened. Anyway, so there was no opportunity to go to talking to the person who I knew that had struggled with this. And it wasn't like I don't have any, gay friends or whatever, but just not.
Would have been nice.
Yes. And just be able to have, have that connection and be able to say, hey, Dad, tell me what's going on. How do I deal with this? What are your thoughts? And why did you choose the path that you chose? Such that when now all four of my kids actually don't go to the LDS church. And there was a whole tension between Martha and me about how do we support that? Because while most of the first three of our kids, and there's an 8-year gap between our third child and our fourth child, we insisted that as long as you're living under our roof, then you're going to church. When our fourth child came along, that was no longer the case. Because
then when you know better, you do better.
Right. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we, instead of forcing this upon them, instead of saying, okay, well, this is the way you have to be, just saying, okay, well, let's look at this. What does work for you? How do we create a space for you to be who you are, to fully express who you are, and to have the freedom to, express that even further? Because I think we're all opening up. We're all, revealing more of ourselves, or at least have the opportunity to, on a regular basis. I'm reading a book right now. I don't remember the title of it, but basically the idea, part of it is that we don't even know our own selves that well. That our ability to even say, well, the reason I do this is because of this, is in a way our best guess as to why we do that. It's not like,
right.
Why do we both end up wearing purple today? Why do we, right. I don't know, just because.
So your daughter came out, and you have other children who have come out?
Yeah, in different ways. So my youngest is actually non-binary and gay.
Okay.
And is 14, will be 14 at the end of this month. My sons, who recognize themselves, identify as that, are somewhere in there. I don't even know. I don't think they even really know.
It is a very fluid place. And I think, I love that your youngest, who is 13, I mean, that's at that age, I think far more children are like not picking, not saying, I'm going to be me, and that's not going to look like anything you're used to before, and you're going to love me for it. And I just think they're fucking incredible.
Yeah, and I do too. And their name is Joy, although that's their middle name. A few years ago, they identified when they started 7th grade, call me Joy, don't call me Carolyn any longer. So we got used to calling them Joy, and now we're still in the process of remembering to call them they and them and all that. And most of the time, I think we get it right, but it's still after 12, 13 years of saying it one way, it's still, our tongues are kind of prone to doing that.
I think the most important thing as a parent in that situation is to just love and affirm and say, I am really, really going to do my best, and I am absolutely going to make mistakes. And so please be patient with me as I relearn and learn to do better. That's the best we can do.
Absolutely.
Because you are going to make mistakes.
Joy is completely accepting and appreciative of people's best efforts.
Love that.
For those people who don't even make the effort, and they have a teacher who makes zero effort, there's all kinds of tension. But for those who are at least trying, she has all kinds of compassion and appreciation for those attempts.
Yeah.
My kids are not so surprised by my non-binary status and my pronouns.
Well, you've just said that. So you guys listening, we get to put our names and our pronouns on Squadcast when we're recording. And so we already said Steve and I can see each other. And will you share your pronouns, please, Steve?
Sure. My pronouns are Z and Zim, Xe'Xim.
Which I wasn't expecting. And then I read your bio as you gave it to me, which uses he, him pronouns. And so I feel like I want to go back and change that, but that's what you gave me because I think you're on a journey.
Yeah. And part of that journey is, for me, the pronouns is more of a visual cue that don't think just because you see me with my goatee and, my short hair and, whatever, the characteristics that biologically identify me as a man doesn't mean that that's all there is to see or all there is to know about me. That we can't know a person without really getting to know them, right? We can't make assumptions about people, although we are definitely very prone to, just because they look or act or do things a certain way.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, as far back as I can remember, all my best friends have always been girls or women. I just spent the week up in the Northwest hanging out with my sister who lost her husband about a month ago.
I'm so sorry. I did read that this morning.
Thank you. And part of it was just, who do I hang out with? And I tended to, it was the women that I hung out with because that's just the way that it has always been for me. It's who I'm comfortable with. There are definitely things that are masculine about me, but there's so much also that is feminine about me. Like I cry far, far, far more than anybody else in my family.
Lots of men cry and it's okay.
But I mean, but it's like that I'm very much in touch with that aspect of me, the more identified as being feminine aspects. I think all of us, to some degree or another, have, that there isn't, we aren't binary. We're not meant to be binary, in any fashion. And some of us are more in one way and some of us are more in another way. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about life is that we have an opportunity for incredible diversity. We have an opportunity for lots of ways for people to show out, to express, to connect, to relate, to be.
Absolutely.
And when we allow that, it creates an opportunity for greater beauty, not less beauty.
So what was your process like to getting comfortable or comfortable of saying, I am non-binary. I don't feel like I'm fully aligned with one gender, and declaring that publicly? I believe you've indicated that has something to do with your decision to officially leave the church. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. It's still very much a journey, as you kind of alluded to with reading my bio. But I actually started identifying and saying, just because you see me as a guy does not mean that that's all there is to me. And that's actually, I started speaking publicly about it without really worrying about pronouns, I don't know, several years ago, at least. Like if you go into my Facebook group, almost everybody in there is a woman. And it's not because I said, well, you can't come in if you're a guy.
Yeah.
And there are things about myself that I recognize that, certain tendencies or philosophies or ways of being or whatever that feel more aligned with what some would identify as being feminine. And then there are other things that, probably I feel like I align more with being masculine. And the reason I chose the Xe'Xim was I was actually trying to figure out, well, how do I identify? How do I make this visible so that people can see that, I'm kind of carrying my little flag around? Or
because you're cisgender, heteronormative appearing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have some indication of that, but I was never comfortable with, I'm not comfortable with they, them. That doesn't really fit for me. I wasn't real comfortable with a zim, with the letter Z. But the X for me, and coming from the math background that I do, where X is, very much a variable. And it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's an H, maybe it's an SH, maybe it's something else.
I love that. I love it. I mean, MX is a lot of even, more progressive, large companies are they stopping making assumptions. If somebody hasn't declared their gender or their pronouns, you address them as MX, which is gender neutral.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we too oftentimes, and this really ties back into my story, the whole corporate identity and, the artist and all that type of thing is, we really don't know ourselves until we start really exploring who we are.
Yeah.
I mean, even your story, you were married with, I don't know how many, 4 kids?
I have 4 also. Mm-hmm.
And from the outside, people would have said, well, this is who Heather is.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't until you started to open up and share and discover and declare who you are that people began to see you differently.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you still get tons of people who are like, well, this is who you are. And
oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's fascinating. And I get it in both directions. So people who know me as a mom and as a woman are often shocked to find out that I am a lesbian. But people who only know me in the queer community, I make lots of friends through my partner, or sometimes even through work, I have come out. They will assume that I somehow did not birth my own children, which is fascinating to me. Oh, how'd you get your kids? I'm like, what kind of question is that? I actually had a guy ask me that at a podcasting conference. How'd you get your kids? And I turned around and I said, I don't know. How'd you get yours? And he was flabbergasted. Well, I had sex with my wife. And he said, was that an inappropriate question? And I'm like, yes, actually it was. Like, why do you need to know how I got my kids? Nobody needs to know that. That's nobody's fucking business unless somebody offers it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And
fascinating.
I think going back to, we all make assumptions, and until we challenge those assumptions.
Yeah.
And do so, like you're just suggesting, do so appropriately. Don't just make an assumption or, walk up to someone who you don't, quote unquote, get and just ask them, an inappropriate question. I think we earn the right to get to know people. We earn the right to get to know ourselves. That when we allow ourselves to show up, when we allow ourselves to question who we are and what we're doing, then we allow for new discovery to show up. We allow for harmony to show up. It's like, there's these cool things that happen when we allow ourselves to express who we are and to discover who we are.
Yeah.
And going back to the church, one of the reasons that I finally made the decision, one, because there are some prominent members of the church leadership who have been really coming out and saying some really harmful and, in my mind, awful things. And they were people that I would have expected to be the last person to said something about that, because they spoke about other things that I really appreciated, like mental health issues and so forth. And then suddenly they're attacking my family, attacking me, attacking, and saying things that seem to come from a place of ignorance and of harm.
Yeah.
And being totally unapologetic about it.
Right.
And pointing their fingers out there and saying, well, you should be different. And also, like, in the church has a handbook where, all the leaders go there to consult and say, well, in this situation, how do I deal with this? And one of the things that is said clearly in there is pronouns should always be she, her, and he, him.
God.
Like, always. And I'm like, what the freak? You have...
Oh, you almost did it. You almost did it, Steve. It almost made you mad enough.
You might get me to do it one time on air, but
yeah.
But it's really, how far does our right to control other people's lives go?
No, that's a fascinating conversation right now with the Supreme Court judgment coming down on women's rights.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. Yes, it makes me angry.
Yeah. It should make you angry. Yeah, it should make us all really angry. So what, if anything, has shifted for you since you made that notable decision to walk away from the church?
Well, where I go to church on Sunday has definitely changed, but
Well, fair enough. But I mean, in your life and in your heart, in your soul.
well, you know what? One of the funny things is that when I was the way it happened was Martha and I went to church like we've been doing for years, and had been doing so on a weekly basis for years. And the mask mandate had just been lifted in our county, and the bishop's up leading the meeting, and the first things out of his mouth, and this is such a little thing, the way I describe it and even shared with him was, it's just a straw that broke the camel's back. There wasn't anything major, but when he said, it's awesome to see all your lovely faces, and some of us, including myself, were still wearing masks. I'm just like, well, what about the rest of us? And I'm just, all this has been building up, but it was just like, that's last straw that I'm like, oh, I need to get out of here. I need some space. And so I went out to the car, went for a drive, and I'm like, well, where do I go now? I'm like, well, I've been thinking about going to this other church for a while. What if I go there? And so I drove over there and went to a different church that was very different than what I'd been going to before.
Well, do you mind if I ask what kind of church it is?
Sure. It was a Center for Spiritual Living.
Okay. I love that.
And I was just kind of like expecting, because this is a way that it's taught so much in the church, is that as soon as you walk away from the church, like the spirit just totally withdraws. Like you start going into depression, and it's like, just this cloud starts following you around. I'm like looking for the cloud, and it's like, I'm not seeing any clouds. It's like, I'm not feeling this heaviness that, is supposed to be falling upon me because I'm making a different decision. And I actually felt, and still do, feel a whole lot better not going to church than I did going to church. And I actually went to several different churches after that, just kind of like looking for my community, somewhere where I feel, well, one, don't feel threatened, but two, feel like, we have shared values and can live in harmony with each other. And I went to the Center for Spiritual Living. I went to the Episcopal Church. Finally went to the Unitarian Church, and that's actually where I've been attending for the last, I don't know, a couple months now.
I wondered if it was Unitarian that you landed on. I have some good friends who attend Unitarian Church. I've never been a churchgoer, and although it appeals to me very much because it really is just rooted in community and love, and there is spirituality, but it's not like God and Jesus. But the idea of having that rigidity on a Sunday morning, I'm like, nope, you can't. I'm not ready to go there at 47. Like, I'm gonna have some coffee and play with the dog and read a book. I will maybe do some tapping and practice self-compassion.
See, and that's part of, because I've been doing tapping, I've been meditating, it's like Buddhism has been a huge part of my life for years. And it was always kind of like this thing that I do on the side because, like nobody at church really accepts that that's even a thing. Mm-hmm. I'm actually in the process of, with a couple of other people, starting a Buddhist Sangha at the UU church, if you're familiar with that.
Cool.
So, yeah. But instead of like being this tangential thing, like, we can't, that's what you do. That's this oddity to that's cool that you're doing it. We totally want to support you and go you.
Yeah. What a game changer. Yeah. To me, there's an awful lot there to celebrate. And I think you've listened to the show a handful of times, Steve, and everyone who knows, that is a question I always ask. It feels like the right time to ask you that. How do you like to celebrate?
How do I like to celebrate? Well, one way I like to celebrate, and I did it a couple of times this weekend, was enjoy a nice big slice of cheesecake.
I love cheesecake. What else?
Honestly, sharing with friends, sharing with community, and how do we celebrate? And honestly, this actually brings up something, and I might even get teary-eyed here. Sunday night, I was at the celebration of life for my brother-in-law, and it was literally a rocking event because my sister and her husband, he especially has been the president of the Cascade Blues Association for the past 30 years. And, all of his friends, his buddies are in the blues world. And so we spent 3 hours jamming to all kinds of bands that were playing their hearts out.
I love that.
And honoring the influence and the person that Greg was.
Celebration is so important. And I think for folks who have had the type of real struggle with mental health, and it's not a thing that goes away from what I understand. I don't want to speak for you, but that you can learn to manage. Doesn't mean there won't be ups and downs, but you have the tools and the resources to recenter yourself, right? Was learning to embrace celebration easy or challenging?
It's still a challenge.
Mm.
I think for me, what is even more crucial was learning to play. Learning to not have my nose against the grindstone and to give myself space to play, to celebrate, to be. And also, in my Facebook group at the end of the week, I always ask people, well, what are you celebrating today? And I don't necessarily ask in that same way. But I think it's essential for us to be celebrating on a regular basis.
Hell yes.
How do we ensure that, today, and I even do that in a way with the journal that I'm developing, where I just look at, what am I delighted about today? What are the 3 things that made me really happy today? And, if we don't stop to consider what's bringing us happiness, how do we ensure that we get more of that? How do we ensure that, and I do actually 2 things. I look at what, the delights that I had, and I also look at the disappointments.
But there are always lessons in the disappointments.
There are.
There's so much to learn there. Absolutely.
And frequently, most often, my delights come from transforming my disappointments.
Oh, that's magical.
It's how do I, by addressing what's working and what's not working in my life, I can then take conscious action towards resolving those things, either increasing them or decreasing them or transforming them in some way so that the disappointments do become delights.
That is beautiful. To me, that's like, okay, we've hit the mic drop moment that your delights can come from via your disappointments. Folks, I just have chills. That is really beautiful. Well, Steve, we could keep talking and we could go on about all sorts of different tangents on this topic, but I want to be mindful of your time and everyone else's time. I'd love to have you share with us your favorite charitable organization to support.
Well, the organization that I support on a regular basis is the suicide hotline, the National Suicide Hotline. Lifeline, actually, it's called.
Lifeline. And that's for obvious reasons, but you can keep sharing. Yeah.
Yes. Not only, and I personally have never called it for my own self, but I did call it for my son. And my son has called it. And, it's one thing to go through the hell of depression and, suicide ideation and so forth. It's quite another to go through it, to be a witness to it in someone else's life and to watch my son go through the struggles of it.
Yeah.
And, I had been supporting the Lifeline before Benjamin had the episodes that he's had in the past year. But I even more so support it now because we need more people talking about, that one, it's okay to struggle. It's okay to be at and then it doesn't have to be the end. That just like we talked about disappointments turning into delights, that those really dark times can also be the genesis for some really bright times. The seeds that grow into these beautiful trees get planted in the darkness of the soil, right? Mm-hmm. That without that darkness being suppressed and being covered up a bit and having a place to grow and to express, we wouldn't have the beauty that we have in the world. And I look back on my own life, and while I have and work rigorously not to go back to that dark place. And for me, my struggle with mental health issues has minimized dramatically. It used to impact me for years, literally, and now it impacts me for moments. And it's because of my relationship with it and my acceptance of it that, sometimes we have dark moments and it's okay. It is not the end of the world. It can feel like the end of the world, but really we always have the opportunity to turn the darkest moments into the brightest moments if we just turn on the light for us to see.
I love that. Really beautiful. I think you have a beautiful energy about you. I love that you constantly surprise me It is so much fun. It reminds me, what I mostly love about it is that it reminds me to check my own assumptions at the door. Because even for somebody who does the amount of LGBTQ work that I do, social justice work, assumptions are I mean, you have to forgive yourself for that too, folks, right? Like we make assumptions. Then the question is, what do we do after we make them? And are you open to learning and being that beacon of, love and light and acceptance and going, oh, damn, I made that mistake. And I recognize that and I'm aware of it. And I'm going to try not to do that one again. So thank you for helping me remember that we're all on the journey.
My pleasure. And honestly, it just goes to show that, we all support each other, because you honestly have helped me on my journey as well. And I've mentioned in the past how, reading your book, your latest book, F Fearless.
Yes.
Was eye-opening. And, I just love the space that you create for your children, and trying to raise them into a place of where they can express and be who they are, the fullest of who they are.
We try. They love to express themselves. Sometimes I'm like, why did I teach them that again? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Just kidding. But parenting is not for the weak of heart.
No, it is not.
Steve, tell folks how they can find you. I mean, you're doing cool things. You have a new podcast out. Tell people about that. And if they want to get to know you better or learn more about working with you, how can they do that?
Sure. So my podcast will be published this month. You can actually find it right now on YouTube, but pretty much for everything of mine, you can find it somewhere on my website, which is giftsintogold.com. You can also find me on Facebook, and I also host the 3 times a year Sing Your Heart Song Summit, which the next one of those is coming up in July.
It's a really fun summit. I've been absolutely honored to be a speaker a couple of times. So y'all can go and check that out. Giftsintogold.com. And I believe when this episode airs, your podcast will be all the way out. And I can't wait for people to listen to it. Steve, thank you so much for being here and sharing your gifts with us and your heart. And I just think you're incredible.
Well, thank you. And back at you.
All right, folks, that is it for today. I hope you loved it as much as I did. And I'd like to hear what you think. The best and easiest way to do that is to follow us on Instagram at the Brave Files Podcast and send us a DM. Let me know if you or someone you know would be a good guest. You can apply directly on our website, thebravefilespodcast.com. It says apply here. That is the only way that you can get featured on this show. You have to do that. Don't send me an email. It'll make me mad. Just saying. But I love you all. I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you for being here. There's so many beautiful moments in this conversation. I have like so many quotes and timestamps, and it's, I'm going to pour back through it and be touched by this conversation over and over again. Thank you for letting me be a part of your brave journey. Until we talk again, this is Heather Vickery reminding you today and every day to go out and choose bravely. Bye now. You've been listening to The Brave Files, stories of people living courageously. Visit us at thebravefilespodcast.com to learn more about the show, find our show notes, and access full episode transcripts. And we'd love to know what you think of the show. We invite you to connect with us via Instagram and send a DM. You'll find us at The Brave Files Podcast on Instagram. Our music was created and produced in a custom collaboration with Matt Lewis from ML Creative Consulting, a boutique firm dedicated to helping clients identify their unique sound and amplify their brand with custom-delivered soundtracks. Special thanks to everyone on Team Brave, from our audio engineer to our producers, associate producers, copy editors, writers, and support team. The show wouldn't exist without them, and we are eternally grateful. I'm your host and executive producer, Heather Vickery. Thanks for tuning in.